Welcome to my program, Creating Marvels. I'm Cecil Disharoon. I was born an American, and I knew Captain America's real name was Steve Rogers before I was old enough to understand what fire meant, as in fired from a job. I asked Mama, could Steve Rogers be fired? I found it very scary to be put into a huge pneumatic tomb and set aflame. I then ran off and made up a scenario where he escapes. I knew Captain America. I knew America. I was a child, and you can know a lot of things then. I was exploring what made freedom, what made independence more than a tricky word to spell, and liberty more than sing songs and a huge cracked bronze bell. If America is about a place where you dream of what you want to be, what kind of America did this fictional brave fighter for the innocent represent? America. Capitalism? Freedom of speech? What are your ideals? Do you believe in nationalism? Patriotism? Service? Loyalty? Baseball, hot dogs, apple pie, and Chevrolet? When I read these stories as an adolescent, I had yet to even conceive of the United States of America being anything but great and doing good. I even attended my second Christian school, which was like my independent Baptist church hosting a home school that put 5 grades under a single teacher. My parents were that serious about supporting fundamentalist education, like my mom and aunt and their parents before them, or her parents, Aunt and Linda and Mom. But then you grow up and ask, and it depends on who is America. Now, I was reminiscing about growing up in America, and I hit upon the memory of denying that Steve Rogers could be fired. And I don't know if I was remotely joking about thinking fired means a person would burn, or if I was just afraid that is how things are done. Uh, but put aside why Captain when he's not served in the armed forces since 1945. And the question of why that rank inspired so many early superhero strips is one I'll check out sometime. But what America does Steve Rogers serve? Cap and his antagonists, especially in this mid 80s run I'm exploring here, are often idealists of a sort. The villains, too, even the Serpent Squad, for its inherent Silver Age trappings as a serpent themed gang working together under Sidewinder, the teleporter, they attempt to co opt some of the ideas that help superhero teams survive. Idealist? Not John Walker. At least, not as presented. On the contrary, I don't intend to judge the literary quality, but this character, this replacement Captain America, seemed created to be inconsistent. The turn towards earnestness that comes upon him when he's actually offered the shield and the identity is subsumed by the writer's agenda. John's lack of experience is a point made from early on, but his power to also take wrong decisions too far seals his doom. Unlike Rhodey, who I wish could have had a good spin off series instead of, or at least a mini or something, instead of the way he was written out in Iron Man, this replacement is not explored in good faith. The possible dangers to the psyche of the augmentation used by Walker to become the Super Patriot were written into the Unlimited Class Wrestling stories that ran out the Thing's solo title to 1986. But this Cap variant was used to explore some of the rifts that came with Walker's dirtier style of fighting, though he dropped the badass flame sword when he took up the shield. So the theme actually came down to two different attitudes about what made a hero, and by extension, what it meant to grow into a man, though now we'd acknowledge those are choices for anyone. If Walker had continued to fight interesting counterparts, like the moral policing watchdog vigilante group in his home state, Georgia, like Cap had, then differing viewpoints could have expanded the conversation, because he's a different man. I think the worst thing about being tied into Marvel after this point, however, is the way that your title will get jerked into crossovers, and this one already has 2 title characters. That's right. Steve Rogers decided not to stay on the sidelines, even after he gave the shield and the costume back to the Commission there in Washington, D.C. Same old Cap, but also trying to do a new thing without the hassle that his recognizable status as Captain America could cut through. Honestly, it's very handy to be identified as such a person in his universe. Now, on the surface, he'd created this persona with bona fides and credibility. The instant Captain America himself walks up, most people feel safer because he's long since developed his comics-driven depiction of committing to actions that help everybody. But why he kept the captain part of the name for some time, I can only say he gathers some supporting characters that he leads, and this makes calling him a titular leader, like captain, sound a little less daft. Like a team captain now. Now, if they'd played it straight and kept the course with the idea that Cap's enemies were, for once, were people he can't punch, they're bureaucrats in Washington, then this could have been an interesting time writing the kind of guy in Walker that just might want to be Captain America at that time in the mid 80s. Probably a grittier and more violent version, but one who didn't start out as, for one, a con man augmented by an iffy process created by a grifter and Dr. Carl Mullis. And he was trying to be a celebrity with a similar motif to Captain America, updated to be more macho and commercial. I don't think the writer had an open mind about why Walker believed what he seemed to believe. But he did see the colorful characters, Grunwald did, the writer, as moral compasses for kids, I do not doubt. And that's fine. But John Walker Cap started with those two strikes because Grunwald wanted to denigrate, not just challenge, the less high-minded kind of character he saw beginning to set the trends. The kind of character Captain America, he reasoned, should not be. But then, the edgier characters, and Spider-Man, were where sales boomed. Mark Grunwald seemed to reconsider giving the other side a chair at the table at some point in John Walker's narrative, but just made things more comic booky and tried to reassure longtime fans. The character he had built was intended not to begin with the angelic moral high ground accorded retroactively to Steve Rogers. Nationalism had different aims and different character in the 1940s than it did in the 1980s, and as it has appeared in recent times. To watch a reactionary, spotlight-loving, and inexperienced young man continue to grapple with why the old Cap did things the way he did is possibly more interesting even than Steve Rogers looking at the envelope and committing to justice and right. Both interesting perspectives, though. The moral certitude we find at Rogers' side becomes a battleground in Walker. But it does mess with the simple propaganda aspect of Captain America as a character. In the interest of better storytelling, though, propaganda always has to stop and service its conclusions, rather than committing to letting the story unfold more of its hidden truths. We do, however, find Walker sympathetic at his most monstrous moments. The horror, the repulsion, is that he does it and does what he does while he's Captain America. Along the way, Marvel walks back the worst things that he did and ignores the rest to bring him back as an obedient, if loose cannon, the U.S. agent. Now, remembering the version of Cap's creation is fictionalized in the creation of The Escapist in the book The Adventures of Cavalier and Clay, the comics creators, in real life, Jack Kirby and Joe Simon, created Captain America with an aggressive aversion to fascism. That novel depicts the artist losing sleep over his chance to escape Nazi persecution and escaping to America, and the fictional creator feels obliged to remember the ongoing struggle of Jews in Eastern Europe. This inspires him to initiate the creation of The Escapist, an homage in a fictional world that's also going to World War II, but one without Marvel Comics. You know, that's something lifelong aficionados of the character keep in mind. Captain America is about principles, honesty, a force to oppose tyranny and oppression. Those things might sound corny decades after his creation, but I hope Americans are more conscious of what could happen here, what has happened and is happening around our world. Freedom breathes inspiration, and I hope I shared a couple of thoughts along the way, because I can do this all day. Thanks for listening.